While we're here, we're going to do a short shop video, show you what's in here. This is going to be a California build. It's going to get an L9H, which is a LS 6.2. L9H and L94 are virtually identical except for the cylinder deactivation. Notice we're going to be running an OEGM evap canister to make California happy. We're also going to run all plastic line. Some guys use vacuum hose or fuel line or whatever to pipe their PCV and evap system, but you really got to run the right stuff. And in California, they're requiring us to run the plastic line because the molecules are smaller, and hydrocarbon molecules are really small. So if you run vacuum hose, you might end up getting some evap leak codes. So this is going to be a California build. Here we have this is a GenRide Elite chassis, and this is done the way Tony likes to do it. So we got a full 4-link in the back, which means we don't have a panhard rod or a track bar, and you have to remove the fuel tank to do that. So we got the GenRide fuel tank in here, which we'll talk about later. There's a lot of stuff going on with that fuel tank. We're going to have full flat skids in this with an LT1, so we got to make sure it runs cool. These are Tony's supplied engine mounts, which are really like bushings with a plate on the engine. We're probably going to end up using that because this guy's going to wheel it. He's not too concerned about isolation and vibration. So we'll get more into this one later. So the body going on this one is over here. The customer blew his engine up, and let's see why. Yeah, we got a supercharger down there, and it's unfortunate guy spent a ton of money on these superchargers before they kind of learned their lesson. This is an L82, which is essentially the same engine as the L83. Now, if you look this up on some of the websites like GM Authority, I think they have it wrong. This engine I've seen rated up to 380 horsepower. Go drive a new like 2021 Silverado. You'd be amazed how much power these things have. You'll notice that this has a cam phaser, but unlike the other LTs, it doesn't have the variable oil pressure solenoid. And I believe that's because this is a non-AFM engine. They don't need that variable oil pressure. So you'll notice that there is no AFM connector up here. There is no lifter manifold assembly. Now, I don't know if GM did that to make a higher performance engine or if they did it because they were running out of parts. Because I know they deleted AFM on some of the L84s and 7s because the parts supply. But this engine's really a performer. It can run up there with a 375 to 400 horsepower engines, and it's a little 5.3 liter. And while doing that, it gets excellent economy. So this combined with the 10-speed, and I'm assuming we have the transmission in, yeah, is a very potent combination. This build also got some Fusion axles in it, which wasn't a big name a few years ago, but they're starting to get there. One of my guys has put an LT1 in his old round body Blazer, and he's getting there. Notice he used the heavy-duty polyurethane mounts we use in our high horsepower builds. So they give pretty good isolation, but they're good for like 800 horsepower, so he shouldn't have any issues. And it looks like he's got a aftermarket vacuum booster, because the original booster is much larger and it would have hit the engine. Am I correct?
Yeah, he did a Willwood. The factory booster was actually touching it just barely. And he also did some long tube headers, and these frames are actually really skinny, so it didn't work out. So he's actually going to go to the stock manifold, which is really not a downside anyway.
Didn't somebody tell you guys that the frames were skinny in this? Don't buy long tube headers? Okay. Wow, this one needs sunglasses. Lime green. I used to have a lime green Cuda. I missed that car. I guess this is just waiting to tear down. Oh, this is Ray from Arizona. Yeah, this is a good lesson for you guys. I'm going to say this thing was built 8 or 10 years ago, and it was built in Phoenix by a shop, and instead of putting like a 400 horsepower LS3 in it, which is in it now, the shop put a 6 liter in it, and they said, we're going to get you 450 horsepower, which they probably did, but they put a big cam in it and rump, and the guy's wife wouldn't drive it. So he was very upset about the drivability. It had a lot of power, but it didn't have drivability. So he brought it to us. We took the 6 liter out, put the LS3 in, and he loves it. He's had this Jeep for a long time. I'm going to say going on 8, maybe 10 years. It's a very, very clean Jeep. And even though he wasn't having any issues with the Motec module, he wanted to upgrade to the latest can. So that's what we're doing on this. We also upgraded him to the new aluminum accessory drive, because this one was old enough. It had the old steel drive on it. Remember, we've been doing these builds since 2008. This has the quad header radiator. It's a plain looking radiator, but the technology in this radiator is pretty much ahead of anything else. We're upgrading the battery tray to clean that up. He likes his Jeep, he's going to keep it, so he's doing all the upgrades now while it's available. And it should be available for some time to come. You can see how many Rubicon transfer cases we have. Lots of engines. And guys, before you call and say, hey, do you have an engine for sale? Email us and we'll try to give you an update on what we have for sale.
Yeah.
I drove this one, didn't I?
You did.
Okay.
You did this one too. This one's going to Evo.
No, I remember having fun in this one. It was, it just rained. So this, yeah, this is the one that had the double throwdown on it, and Mel's going to update all the stuff.
Yep.
What do we got here?
This one is an LT1. We're doing new axles on it. We're aligning the suspension right now.
This has got a rear-mounted transmission cooler?
Yeah, it's got a rail cooler and the rear-mounted transmission cooler, and we're installing PSC as well.
Let's look at that rail cooler. What's on the rack? This is a radiant cooler, and that looks to be, what, 23 inches?
These are about 25 to 26.
25. So that's going to give you enough cooling with these 40s, even when you're out here in the Southwest. So here's the rear-mounted fan cooler, and it does look small, but they work pretty good. Has this got a 10-speed in it?
Yeah, 10-speed.
10 speeds run really cool. They don't have thermostats in the cooling lines, and I noticed they'll run 145 to 170 all day long out here in the Southwest, even in the heat with these 40s. This is a ram we're putting in.
Yeah, and then we switched to the clamp style now. We used to use the weld-on tabs, like right here, but those are kind of more of a pain in the butt to set, so the clamp is much easier. You can make as many adjustments as you need without having any issues.
Now this is a steel clamp, and you can use it on a steel tie rod or aluminum, but my warning to you is these will slip if you put too much stress on them. So what you want to do is you want to rough up the tie rod and maybe even use some kind of locking compound like purple or green Loctite. I don't know, you might want to talk to the manufacturer, but since we've been doing that, we haven't had any issues. But in extreme applications where you got 42-inch tires and you're crawling a rock waterfall, I have seen these things slip. But with those few precautions, you shouldn't have a problem. We're going to do a short video on this build, and no, we didn't build it. It was built somewhere else, and we're going to redo it. And we're going to show you kind of the ups and downs and what shops are doing out there and what guys are doing in their garage and what you want to do and what you don't want to do. This Jeep came in, the guys opened the hood, and I'm taking a quick look at it right now. Now they've put the S-Pod over here because they got all their other stuff over there. Right off the top, never use these plastic adapters on the heater hoses. They will melt in the summer and you will have a coolant leak. I think you can see that this is just an absolute mess, and we're not gonna address that any further. This is not the right way to crimp a terminal. That's not the way you terminate a wire, especially two wires like that. They did try to go with a single module on this. I guess they did. And my guy was showing me, go ahead, Callan, show me the PCM connector.
Okay, so what they did is they just took the two CAN wires and put a 120 ohm resistor in there, so that way the Jeep doesn't think that the computer is there anymore. But it's not a good fix. So every now and then the security light will come on, and then the Jeep actually won't start.
Right, it's a terminating resistor is what it is, because these CAN networks have terminating resistors on either end of the network. Chrysler is parallel and serial. It gets a little complicated, but basically when the engine died or wouldn't start, you'd have to plug the computer in for security stuff, so the guy had to keep the computer in the back seat. We got an S-Pod over here, and you guys know I'm not a big fan of mounting the S-Pod up here.
Compressor.
I'm sorry, AC compressor, ARB dual. The S-Pod's over there, which is kind of funky. And something I really don't understand is they put the air intake tube going this way, and the air filter's down here. We can't get it out. As you can see, that's not easy to service. And then they put the S-Pod over here, and this is a standard PSC location. I think that's coolant. Is that coolant?
Yeah, that's coolant, and it's got a factory radiator.
Plastic radiator.
Pentastar fan.
Okay, so go ahead, Cal, what else you got here?
This is kind of pointless as well.
Yeah, I don't like these mounts, guys. I know Dorelli and I think PSC sells them, and the reason is it's just blocking too much airflow. Look how much, if you had a power steering cooler and a tranny cooler in here, plus all this, you are restricting a lot of airflow to the tranny cooler, then the AC condenser, then the radiator back here. And we got a small radiator, so this guy's gonna have a problem with cooling. So what we wanna do is get rid of all this stuff and just put the tranny cooler right onto the front of the AC condenser, which is what we're gonna do.
This PCM bracket is rubbing right into the hose, so they put this big loom in there, but this screw is actually already rubbing a hole into it. So
okay, so you know, stuff like that is just stupid work, meaning that can happen in any conversion if you're not careful. That's not really a design flaw, it's just poor workmanship. And the way they have the manifold assembly for the ARB back there, that's just kind of stupid too. And you can't expect reliability with a setup like this. Now we do have the this is a Cole Hersey 200 amp isolation relay, and it is hooked up to the smart isolator. And again, I'm not a really big fan of this. This isolator basically, when it's running, should connect the batteries together to the alternator so that they both charge. And then when you turn it off, the smart isolator separates the batteries. But the problem is this smart electronics really was designed for like a motorhome where you have refrigerators and fans and other things that stay on. And your voltage drops quickly. And it drops below about 12.7 volts because nominal voltage on a battery is about 12.6. And then it isolates the batteries and the world's wonderful. But the problem is in a JK, well, there's a couple of problems. One, we're running AGMs. So AGMs don't necessarily run at 12.6 nominal. I've seen these things float at 12.8, 12.9. And if you don't have any loads in the vehicle to pull it down, this may not isolate. And if this doesn't isolate, it stays powered up and it draws about 1 amp and then your batteries go dead. Now, a lot of you guys don't have that problem because your setup's a lot cleaner. And if it's working for you, like I tell my customers, if it works for you before the swap, it's going to work after the swap. If you're having a problem with it, then we put a dumb isolator in. Essentially, we use the same relay, 200 amp continuous, and then we just hook it into the TIPM for a trigger. These are your triggers, these are your power side. And what that does is when the engine's running, these batteries are charging. When the engine's off, these batteries are separated. Now, there's a caveat there because this smart isolator is supposed to sense if there's too much current being drawn on the alternator or other conditions, and then it will separate the batteries even when the engine is running. Well, even this wimpy alternator for an LT can put out well over 100 amps, probably closer to 150. So we don't have that constraint. So I like to make these into a dumb isolator, and it's not a hard thing to do, and that's probably what we're going to do. Okay, so here's another level of refinement we've reached. Here's the air conditioning lines, and you see they got them running on top here. What we do is we don't modify the factory lines. We run them out to about here, and then we have our own lines that run down and across. We have a crossover tube for the coolant right to the compressor because the compressor's down there. And it's a much cleaner setup. It works great. It's out of the way. You don't have to worry about having rubber, 10 feet of rubber hose going through your engine compartment. And these are the things that we learned over the years. This S-Pod, they don't usually put these on the passenger side, and as you can see, it's not really that secure. So this swap just didn't have the attention to detail that it probably should have had. Okay, so here's one of our bills. Is this an LD6 or an LT1?
This is an LT1.
Okay, so this is a real LT1, and you can see we have our crossover tube for the coolant, which brings the coolant from the water pump over to this side. You really can't put an outlet over here because it'll stick right into the steering gear. And we did go to a single pass radiator to get the flexibility that we need with a quad header core. It's like out of a Caterpillar tractor to keep these aluminum radiators from leaking. You can see we have a factory AC compressor here, and our hookups are over here. So our lines will be run cleanly here, and then they interface directly with the factory AC lines. So if you damage an upper line, you can just replace it with a stock line. Same thing with the power steering. We're running stock power steering lines, so that's another benefit. So this is an LT1 intake fitted to an L86. I like the look of the LT1 intake. This vehicle over here has a LT2 intake, and it also has a LAT drive, which, if it works, it works. We like the way our lays out and looks. We can always do an LT2 intake if you like. One of the nice things about the LT1 intake is it does incorporate a vacuum port in the back for your brakes, and it works great.
Yeah, so they did a T over here to get the brakes
going. So they teed into the PCV system, which you really kind of don't want to do. Also on the L86, you have the option of going with a mechanical vacuum pump, and that would be my favorite. So what we're going to do, when it came in, we were thinking, oh, we're just going to clean it up. But there's a lot of stuff that doesn't work, like cruise control, and the air conditioning doesn't work right. So we're just going to pull the body off and do it all over, rip it all out and do it over. And you guys hear me say all the time that it takes us longer to do something that's already been done than to do something from scratch that's never, or a JK that's never been touched. And this is the reason why. We have to undo everything that was done and then do it properly. So we're going to have to get an original Jeep PCM. I think he has it in the vehicle, and we're going to change all this stuff out and make everything work properly. Get tap shift. Does this vehicle have tap shift?
It doesn't work.
So we don't have tap shift, we don't have cruise control, air conditioning doesn't work right, and if you took this thing off road for any amount of time, you're not going to do good. So we'll come back and show you this Jeep when it's done. Here we have a Root style Sprintax supercharger. I think it's a Sprintax, and we see a lot of these on both the 3.8s and the 3.6s. But if you really want to get horsepower, this is the way to go. This is an LT here. You can't see it, but there's a high pressure fuel pump back there. You got direct injection, so you notice there's no fuel injectors in the intake. They're actually right there. It's a very, very sophisticated engine. Continuous variable valve timing, multi-stage oil pump. This is our cam sensor here. Here's our original vacuum pump, which if you want to run it, I think is a great thing. All you got to do is plug this into your brake booster, and as long as this engine's turning, you got good vacuum. Very well engineered engine. The performance and emissions of this engine is so advanced that GM has decided to cancel development on their straight six twin turbo because you can't beat the V8. There's no replacement for displacement. Now these engines are building horsepower with technology, but if you hear this monster over here, this engine is allegedly 650 horsepower. I just took it to Utah, actually ran like a dream. Just doing some final tweaks on it. We're doing some final tweaks on it. It's a 7-liter LS. Runs great, but it's going overseas, so it's going to be here for a little while. So there you go. That's what's going on, and we'll see you next time.